You're fired. Get out of my building. Damien Vittorio's voice cut through the conference room like a blade. Emily Carter didn't move, didn't breathe. Around her, 40 people watched in silence. Nobody spoke, nobody moved, nobody defended her. Then Victoria Reynolds stood up, slowly smoothed her jacket, and did something that made Emily's blood run cold. She laughed, quiet, satisfied. The laugh of a woman who had been engineering this exact moment for months. Security will escort you out, Victoria said sweetly. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Emily looked at Damien. He was already looking away. If this story already has your heart beating faster, please subscribe to our channel right now and follow this story all the way to the end. And drop a comment below telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The morning Emily Carter was fired, she arrived at work 20 minutes early. That was nothing unusual. Emily always arrived early. She liked the quiet that lived inside the Vittorio Foundation's community library before the doors opened. She liked the way the light came through the tall windows and touched the spines of the books like it was greeting old friends. She liked those first 20 minutes when the world was still and she could walk the aisles and feel that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She had worked in this library for 7 years. 7 years of staying late to finish programs nobody asked her to finish. 7 years of memorizing the names of every child who came through those doors. 7 years of calling donors personally, not through a formal letter, not through an assistant, but personally with her own voice, asking them to believe in something bigger than themselves. She loved this place the way some people love the home they grew up in. Not because it was perfect, but because it was hers. That morning, Emily was carrying a folder tucked under her left arm. Inside that folder was the most important presentation she had ever prepared. A proposal for a new literacy program that would send free books, thousands of them, into neighborhoods where children went to school without ever owning a single book of their own. She had spent 4 months building that proposal. She had the statistics. She had the community letters. She had the projected impact numbers. She had photographs of the children who would benefit. She believed in it with her whole heart. She was ready. What she was not ready for was Victoria Reynolds. Victoria was already in the building when Emily arrived. That was unusual. Victoria rarely came in before 9. She was the kind of woman who believed arriving fashionably late projected authority. But that morning, Victoria was standing near the reception desk with her arms crossed and her eyes sharp, watching Emily come through the door like a hunter watching something small move through tall grass. Emily smiled at her. Good morning, Victoria. You're here early. Victoria did not smile back. The board meeting has been moved up, Victoria said. 8 o'clock sharp. Make sure you're ready. Emily adjusted the folder under her arm. I'm always ready. Victoria looked at her for one long moment. Then she turned and walked away without another word. Emily watched her go. There was something in the way Victoria moved that morning. Something too controlled, too deliberate, like a woman who had already made a decision and was simply waiting for the right moment to announce it. Emily filed the feeling away and went to her office. She spent the next hour reviewing her notes. She rehearsed the key points of her presentation. She made sure every page was in order. She thought about the children in those neighborhoods, the ones who would benefit if the board said yes. She thought about the woman who had come into the library 3 weeks earlier, a grandmother raising 4 grandchildren on a fixed income, who had cried quietly in the corner while reading a picture book to the youngest one because she couldn't afford to buy them anything to take home. Emily thought about that grandmother, and she straightened her shoulders, and she walked into the conference room at 7:59. The room was already full. Board members, senior executives, major donors, investors who had flown in from out of state. There were people in that room whose names appeared in newspapers, people who made decisions that moved entire cities. Emily found her seat near the center of the long table. She noticed Victoria immediately. Victoria was seated close to the head of the table, which was unusual. Victoria's usual seat was 2 chairs further down. But today she sat close, almost protectively close to the chair at the very top. The chair that belonged to Damien Vittorio. Emily had seen Damien many times over the 7 years she had worked for the foundation. He came through this library, occasionally always unannounced, always alone. He would walk the aisles slowly, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression unreadable. He never asked for help. He never requested anything. But once early in her second year, he had stopped in front of the poetry section and stood there for a long time without moving, and Emily had walked over quietly and said, "If you're looking for something that doesn't ask anything of you in return, try Neruda. Third shelf down, second from the left." He had looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite name. Then he had reached for the book without saying a word. He'd returned it 3 days later with a crease in the spine that told her he had read it more than once. That was the closest thing to a conversation they had ever had. Damien entered the conference room at exactly 8 o'clock. The room changed when he walked in. Not dramatically, not the way it changes in movies with a sudden hush and dramatic music. It changed the way a room changes when the barometric pressure drops before a storm. Subtle, almost imperceptible. But every person at that table felt it. He sat down, he surveyed the room. His eyes passed over Emily without stopping. The meeting began. Emily waded through the financial updates, the quarterly reports, the investment overviews. She watched the clock. She kept her folder closed on the table in front of her, and her hands folded on top of it, the way her mother had taught her to wait with patience. When Victoria stood to introduce her portion of the agenda, Emily prepared to stand. "Before we move to new program proposals," Victoria said, her voice carrying across the room with practiced confidence, "I need to address a matter of serious concern regarding the Foundation's Community Library Division." Emily's hands tightened slightly on top of the folder. Victoria opened her own folder. She pulled out a document and placed it on the table in front of the board chair. "Over the past several months," Victoria said, "I have been conducting an internal review of library operations. What I found was deeply troubling." She paused. She was good at pauses. She had the kind of pauses that made people lean forward. Irregular financial reporting, misuse of allocated program funds, unauthorized expenditures totaling more than $40,000 across a 14-month period. The room went still. Emily stopped breathing. "The documentation has been reviewed by our external auditor," Victoria continued, "and the conclusion is unambiguous." She looked directly at Emily. "Emily Carter has been misappropriating foundation funds." The words hit the room like something physical. Emily heard someone draw a sharp breath. She heard the creak of a chair as a board member shifted. She heard the silence that followed, the specific kind of silence that only happens when something unexpected has destroyed the oxygen in a room. Emily's heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat, but she sat completely still, because she knew with absolute certainty that what Victoria had just said was a lie. Victoria kept talking. She referenced numbers, dates, account transfers. She spoke with the smooth authority of someone who had rehearsed every word. She presented documents. She showed slides. She built a case the way a skilled attorney builds a case, piece by piece, each element designed to fit perfectly with the next, the whole structure, so convincing that even Emily, who knew it was false, found herself momentarily doubting her own memory. When Victoria finished, the room was utterly quiet. Every face at that table turned one by one toward Damien Vittorio. He had not moved during Victoria's entire presentation. He had not written a single note. He had not asked a single question. He had simply listened with his hands flat on the table and his eyes steady and his expression revealing nothing at all. He looked at the documents Victoria had passed to him. He looked at them for a long time. Then he set them down. Emily Carter. Her name in his voice, low and deliberate and carrying absolutely no warmth. Every eye in the room swung to her. Emily met his gaze directly. She had always been able to look Damien Vittorio in the eye. It was something that had always seemed to catch him slightly off guard, the fact that she didn't look away. Most people looked away. "Yes, Mr. Vittorio. Your employment with this foundation ends today." Nobody moved. Emily heard the words. She understood them. She felt the room contract around her, felt every person at that table become very still, the way witnesses to something terrible go. Still some instinct of the body pulling them back from whatever is happening, separating themselves from the wreckage. She heard herself breathe. "May I ask why?" The question was quiet, steady. She was proud of how steady it was. Damien looked at her. "No," one word. She had spent 7 years of her life in this building. 7 years. She had memorized the names of the donors. She had stayed late on her own time. She had cried privately when the funding got cut, and then found creative ways to work around the cut so the children wouldn't feel it. She had brought in volunteers, she had negotiated book donations, she had written grants on weekends. One word. Emily looked around the table. She scanned the faces of people she had greeted by name for years, people whose children's names she knew, people she had found books for, people she had quietly supported in ways none of them had ever been aware of. Most of them looked away. Victoria did not look away. Victoria watched with the expression of someone who has been waiting a very long time for exactly this moment. Emily understood then, with a clarity that felt almost peaceful in its terrible completeness, that she was not going to receive help from anyone in this room. She could fight. She could demand to see the documents. She could point out every lie. She could raise her voice and force them to hear her. But she had spent enough time with people to know that this room had already decided. The decision had been made before she walked in. The presentation was theater. The outcome had never been in question. Fighting in a room where the verdict is already written doesn't change the verdict. It only changes how you leave. Emily closed her folder. The soft sound of it seemed to echo. "I understand," she said. She heard a sound from someone down the table. Not quite a gasp, almost a gasp. She stood. Her legs were steady, and she was grateful for that. She was very, very grateful for that. "Thank you," she said, looking at the room evenly, "for the opportunity to serve this foundation. It has been the privilege of my professional life. I wish each of you continued success." She picked up her folder. She walked to the door. She did not look back. Behind her, she heard Victoria begin speaking again, pivoting smoothly to the next agenda item, as though nothing significant had just happened, as though a woman who had given everything she had to this place had not just been walked out of it. Emily kept walking. She went to her office. Her hands, which had been perfectly steady in that conference room, began to shake the moment she closed the office door behind her. She set the folder down on her desk and stood with her palms pressed flat against the desktop and breathed. In, out, in, out. She looked at her office. 7 years of small accumulations. A photograph from the library's holiday party 3 years ago where the children had made paper crowns and put one on her head. A coffee mug from a donor with a quote she had always loved. A small potted plant she had been keeping alive through multiple rounds of neglect and revival. A framed thank you note from the grandmother of a little boy named Marcus, who had learned to read in one of her programs. She took the photograph. She took the mug. She took the plant. She left the frame on the desk because the thank you note, the words on it, were already memorized in her heart. She packed the small box. She walked to the library floor. Rosa, the library assistant, was shelving books when Emily came out of the office with the box under her arm. Rosa turned and saw her face and understood instantly the way women who work closely together for years understand things without being told. Rosa's face crumpled. "Emily, don't cry," Emily said softly. "You'll make me cry, and I have decided not to do that in this building." Rosa pressed her hand over her mouth. Emily set the box down and hugged her, held her for a long moment. "Take care of the reading corner," Emily said quietly into her shoulder. "The new reader group comes in on Thursday. Mrs. Patterson in the back row needs large print. She's too proud to ask, just quietly set it out." Rosa pulled back and nodded, her eyes bright and red. Emily picked up her box. She walked through the library one last time. She touched the spine of a few books as she passed. The way you touch the shoulder of a friend you're not sure you'll see again. She walked out of the Vittorio Foundation with her box of 3 things and her folder of a proposal that would never be presented to anyone. The street outside was ordinary. Traffic moved. People walked. The city continued at its usual indifferent pace, completely unaware that something had just ended. Emily stood on the sidewalk. She let herself feel it for exactly 30 seconds. 30 seconds of standing on a sidewalk and feeling the full weight of what had just happened. 7 years, a public accusation she couldn't counter. A room full of witnesses who looked away. One word from one powerful man who hadn't even asked for her side of the story. No. 30 seconds. Then she shifted the box under her arm, pulled a full breath of Chicago air into her lungs, and started walking. That night, alone in her apartment, Emily allowed herself to do something she had never allowed herself to do at work. She cried. She cried hard, the way you only cry when you're absolutely alone and there is nobody to be strong for. She cried for the programs that might not continue. She cried for Mrs. Patterson, who would come in Thursday and there would be no large print book already set out. She cried for the children she wouldn't see again. She cried for the proposal in the folder that she had worked on for 4 months, and that represented something she genuinely believed would change lives. She cried until there was nothing left. Then she washed her face. Then she made tea. Then she sat down at her kitchen table with a notepad and a pen. At the top of the page, she wrote, "What now?" Not as a question, as a problem to solve. By midnight, the page was full. She was not someone who had ever needed someone else to define her value. She had learned that early, growing up in a household where there was never quite enough of anything, where she had learned to find the extraordinary inside the ordinary, to stretch what you had and make it mean more than it should have. She knew libraries. She knew communities. She knew people. Those things had not been fired. Those things were still hers. The next morning, Emily woke up before dawn. She did not allow herself to stay in bed past 5:30. She dressed. She made coffee. She stood at her kitchen window and watched Chicago wake up. Then she called Judith Mercer. Judith was 63 years old and ran the Rosewood Community Library out of a building that needed a new roof, new shelving, a new boiler, and honestly, probably a new everything. Judith had been trying to recruit Emily for 2 years casually in the way that good people recruit people they admire, not with aggressive offers, but with quiet, consistent reminders that the door was open. The phone rang 3 times. "Emily Carter," Judith said when she answered, and her voice carried the warmth of someone who is genuinely delighted by a surprise. "I was wondering when you'd call." Emily almost laughed. "How did you know?" "Honey, I have been in this work for 40 years. I know when someone has been pushed out of somewhere they shouldn't have been pushed out of." A brief pause. "Are you all right?" Emily thought about the question honestly. "I will be," she said. "That is the right answer." Judith was quiet for a moment. "The library position is yours if you want it. I will warn you in advance that the salary would make a person weep and the building is one good rainstorm away from an insurance claim." "I want it," Emily said. She heard Judith exhale. "Good," Judith said simply. "Come Monday. Come early. I'll make real coffee." Emily said goodbye and hung up the phone. She stood for a moment in her quiet kitchen with the morning light coming in. She thought about the Victorio Foundation conference room. She thought about the way the room had gone silent when Damien said her name. She thought about Victoria's smooth, practiced voice building its careful architecture of lies while Emily sat there and watched it happen and understood that truth by itself is not always enough to protect you. She thought about all of that, and then she set it aside, not because it didn't hurt, it hurt enormously, but because she had learned over years of working with people who had lost things far more devastating than a job that the question of who harmed you and why is far less important than the question of what you are going to build next. She picked up her notepad from the night before. She turned to a fresh page, and she started writing. Now, what happened next would change everything. Because at that exact moment, 6 miles away inside the top floor office of the Vittorio Foundation, a man who had said a single cold word to her was staring at a document that had just landed on his desk. A document that had not been there the night before. A document that had been delivered quietly anonymously to his private office by someone who clearly wanted it seen without being identified. The document was 12 pages long. It contained financial records, not the ones Victoria had presented in the conference room. Different ones, older ones, records that showed line by line, transfer by transfer, that the $40,000 Victoria had attributed to Emily Carter had moved through a completely different account on dates when Emily had been documented as out of the building authorized by a signature that on closer inspection was not Emily's at all. Damien sat at his desk and read all 12 pages. Then he read them again. He set the document down. He pressed his fingertips together and stared at the far wall of his office and did not move for a very long time. Because Damien Vittorio had built an empire on the ability to read people, it was the one skill that had kept him alive in situations where being wrong about a person was not merely costly but catastrophic. He had trusted that skill his entire life. And he had just realized with the specific ice-cold clarity of a man who never made the same mistake twice that he had misread Emily Carter completely. He had believed the evidence. He had believed Victoria. He had not asked Emily a single question. He had said no when she'd asked for an explanation. One word. And he had sent an innocent woman out of a room full of witnesses with nothing but a box of 3 things and whatever was left of her dignity. Damien stood up from his desk. He walked to his window. He looked out at Chicago and thought about the woman who had once told him in the quiet of the library that if he was looking for something that didn't ask anything of him in return, he should try Neruda. Third shelf down, second from the left. He thought about the fact that he had gone back and looked for that specific Neruda book 2 more times after returning it. He thought about the fact that he had never told anyone that. And then Damien Vittorio, who never explained himself to anyone, who had not apologized to a living soul in longer than he could remember, reached for his phone and called his head of internal security. I need you to find out everything about an account that ran through the Foundation's books. Starting 14 months ago, he said, and I need to know where Emily Carter is working. There was a brief pause on the other end. Emily Carter, the librarian who was, yes, Damien said, that one, he paused. Find her, he said quietly, and that was where the real story began. Not in the conference room where Emily was humiliated. Not in the quiet apartment where she rebuilt herself overnight, but in the cold, still office of a man who had just made the worst mistake of his life, and who, unlike most powerful men, was about to do something about it. Even if he didn't fully understand yet why it mattered so much to him. Even if the reason had nothing to do with justice at all, and everything to do with the fact that in 7 years of watching powerful people move through his foundation, only one person had ever looked him in the eye and seen something other than what he was afraid of. He wasn't going to let her disappear. Not because he owed it to her, although he did, but because something in him, something old and stubborn and rarely honest, recognized that Emily Carter was the only person he had ever met who treated him like a human being. And he had no idea what to do with that, but he intended to figure it out. The morning after the worst day of her life, Emily Carter woke up at 5:15. Not because she had slept well. She hadn't slept at all. She had lain in the dark with her eyes open and the ceiling above her, in the particular kind of silence that only exists in apartments where someone is trying very hard not to think. But she got up anyway, because staying in bed felt like surrendering, and Emily Carter did not surrender. She made coffee. She stood at her kitchen window. She watched the city outside begin its slow, indifferent morning routine buses, pulling away from curbs lights flickering on in apartment windows across the street. A man walking a dog who had no idea that anything in the world had changed. The world had not changed, only her position in it had. She held her coffee mug with both hands and let herself feel the full weight of it for exactly as long as it took to finish that first cup. The humiliation, the silence of the room when Victoria laughed, Damien's eyes already moving away from her before she had even stood up. The walk through the library touching the spines of books like saying goodbye to people she loved. Rosa's face. She set the empty mug in the sink. She picked up her phone. She called Judith Mercer. Judith answered on the third ring, which told Emily that Judith had been awake for a while too, because Judith was the kind of woman who slept lightly and picked up fast. Emily Carter, Judith said, and the warmth in her voice, simple and uncomplicated and genuinely glad, was almost enough to undo Emily completely. Almost. I was wondering when you'd call. You already heard, Emily said. It wasn't a question. Word travels fast in this city when it involves Damien Vittorio. A brief pause. Are you all right? Emily looked out the window. A pigeon landed on the ledge opposite and regarded her with complete indifference. I will be, she said. Good answer. Judith's voice shifted into something more practical, the way it always did when she moved from caring about a person to helping them. The position is still open. It has been open specifically for you for 2 years, as I think you know. The salary is going to make you wince, and the building is held together with institutional optimism and approximately 40 years of deferred maintenance. I want it, Emily said. A pause. You sure you could stay a week? You don't have to decide today. Judith. Emily's voice was quiet but firm. I need to work. If I sit in this apartment for a week, I will spend the entire time being angry, and I refuse to let Victoria Reynolds have my week. Judith made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. Monday morning, she said. Come early. I'll have real coffee waiting. Emily said goodbye and set the phone down on the counter. She went to her kitchen table. She opened her notepad, and for the next 3 hours she planned. She did not plan how to get revenge. She did not plan how to expose Victoria. She did not plan how to make Damien Vittorio understand what he had done. She planned programs. She wrote down everything she knew about rebuilding a library from almost nothing because she had done it before. Not with the Vittorio Foundation's resources, not with their donor network and their endowment and their foundation backing. She had done it before she had any of that at the very beginning, when the community library at the foundation had been an empty building that smelled like disuse and forgotten ambition. She knew how to start from nothing. She had always known. That Monday, Emily walked into Rosewood Community Library for the first time as an employee. Judith had not been exaggerating about the building. The shelving along the north wall leaned at an angle that suggested it was engaged in a long argument with gravity. The carpet in the children's section had been patched in 3 places with material that did not quite match. 2 of the overhead lights flickered at random intervals. The heating system made a sound every 20 minutes or so that Emily could only describe as a building clearing its throat. But the library was full of light. Real light. Morning light coming through tall windows that someone had recently cleaned. And there were people in it. Not many, not yet, but enough. A teenage boy with headphones around his neck, sitting at one of the reading tables with a textbook open in front of him. An elderly woman in a blue coat browsing the large print section, slowly running her fingers along the spines. A young mother in the children's corner, reading to a toddler who kept trying to eat the corner of the book. Emily stood in the entrance and looked at all of it, and she felt something she had not expected to feel on her first morning. She felt like she was home. Judith came out from behind the desk and hugged her without preamble, the way women of a certain age hug people they have been worried about firmly and without any self-consciousness about it. "Coffee is in the back," Judith said, pulling back and looking at Emily with careful eyes. "Staff bathroom is next to the storage room. The heater makes a noise at 20-minute intervals. I have named it Gerald. Don't be alarmed." Emily laughed. It surprised her. She hadn't expected to laugh that morning. "What do you need me to do first?" she asked. Judith looked at her for a moment. "Whatever you think needs doing," she said simply. "That's why I've been waiting for you." So Emily got to work. She started the way she always started, not with programs or budgets or strategic plans. She started with people. She introduced herself to every person in the library that morning. Not formally, not with a title or a business card or a prepared speech. She walked up to each person individually and said her name and asked theirs, and then asked them one genuine question about what they were looking for. The teenage boy with the headphones was named Deshaun. He was 17. He was trying to get through a history assignment that made no sense to him, because as he explained with the particular exhaustion of a teenager who has been failed by an explanation, he was too polite to say was bad. His teacher just read from the textbook, and he learned better when someone told him the actual story behind the facts. Emily sat down across from him for 20 minutes and told him the actual story. Deshaun took 3 pages of notes he hadn't been asked to take. The elderly woman in the blue coat was named Helen. She was 78. She had macular degeneration that made standard print painful to read, and she came to the library 3 times a week because it was the only place outside of her apartment that felt comfortable to her, and because the large print selection, while limited, gave her something to look forward to. Emily noted the gaps in the large print collection. She committed Helen's preferences to memory without writing them down, because writing them down in front of someone while they talk to you sent a message. Emily had always disliked the message that you needed a system to remember that they mattered. By noon, Emily had spoken to every person who came through the door. By Wednesday, she knew most of their names. By the following Monday, she had implemented the first of 3 new programs. A Tuesday afternoon reading group for seniors. A Saturday morning story hour for children that she structured specifically to accommodate working parents who couldn't bring kids on weekday afternoons. And a Wednesday evening homework help session that Deshaun showed up to first and brought 2 friends to by the 3rd week. People started talking, not loudly, not all at once. The way people talk when something good happens in a neighborhood that isn't used to good things happening, carefully at first, like they're afraid saying it out loud might make it stop. But they talked. There's a librarian at Rosewood. She actually listens. She remembered that I mentioned my husband last month. She found a book about grief that I didn't ask for and just set it on the table in front of me like it was nothing. She stayed 40 minutes after closing to help my son finish a scholarship application. Shows your name before you've come back a second time. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, something else was happening. Damien Vittorio had not slept well either. Not because of guilt exactly. Damien was not a man who experienced guilt in the straightforward way most people did. He experienced it the way he experienced most things as information, as data, as evidence of a miscalculation that needed to be corrected. The document that had appeared on his desk the morning after he fired Emily had not gone away. He had read it 6 times now. He had had his most trusted analyst verify every number independently, without telling the analyst what he was looking for or why, and the conclusion had come back the same every time. The financial irregularities had nothing to do with Emily Carter. The signature on the authorization documents was not hers. The account through which the funds had moved had been opened using foundation credentials but had been accessed from an IP address that, when traced, led not to Emily's office computer or her personal devices, but to a terminal in a private office on the building's executive floor. Victoria's floor. Damien stood at his window and considered what he knew. He had fired an innocent woman in front of 40 witnesses based on evidence that had been manufactured by his own executive director. Victoria had used him. She had understood him well enough to know that he trusted documented evidence over personal testimony. She had understood that he would not ask Emily for her side of the story because he never asked anyone for their side of the story. He looked at records, he looked at numbers, he looked at the paperwork, and she had built her lie specifically around those habits. She had played him. Nobody played Damien Vittorio. He turned from the window and pressed the intercom button on his desk. "Get me Marcus." Marcus Reed was Damien's head of internal security and had been for 11 years. He was the kind of man who found information the way other people found car keys, efficiently and without drama, and who understood instinctively that his job was to gather facts and not to offer opinions about them unless specifically asked. He appeared in Damien's office within 4 minutes. "Close the door," Damien said. Marcus closed it. "I need everything on Victoria Reynolds. Personal finances, outside accounts, any relationships with competing foundations or investment groups, any contacts she's had with board members outside of official meetings. Everything going back 18 months. Marcus didn't blink. "Timeline." "Yesterday," Damien said. "I'll need 48 hours. "You have 36. Marcus nodded and left. Damien sat back down at his desk. He looked at the document again, the one that had appeared anonymously. Someone inside the foundation had sent it. Someone who had seen what Victoria did and had decided for whatever reason that Damien should know the truth. He thought about who that might be. He thought briefly about Rosa, the library assistant who had worked with Emily for 5 years and who had, from what his security team had reported, spent a significant portion of her first day after Emily's dismissal, crying in the staff break room, and the rest of it doing her work with the specific mechanical precision of someone who was keeping it together through pure force of will. Rosa had access to financial records through the library's administrative system. Rosa was also fiercely loyal to Emily Carter. Damien filed that away. He opened his laptop. He typed Rosewood Community Library into the search bar. The library had a website, minimal, clearly built by someone who understood content better than design. There was a page with the library's hours and address, a page with upcoming programs. He read the programs page. Tuesday, senior reading group, newly formed, first session this week. Saturday morning story hour begins this Saturday, all ages welcome, bilingual materials available. Wednesday evening homework, help open to middle and high school students, free. 3 programs, launched in the first week, by a woman who had just been publicly fired, falsely accused, and walked out of a building in front of 40 witnesses. Damien stared at the screen. Then he did something he had not done in a very long time. He drove across town himself. No driver, no security detail. He told them he had an appointment and drove his own car, which was unremarkable enough, a dark sedan, nothing that announced anything, and he parked 2 blocks from Rosewood Community Library and sat in the car for a moment. He was not sure what he was doing here. He told himself he was conducting reconnaissance. He told himself he wanted to assess Emily's situation firsthand before making any decisions about how to proceed with what he now understood to be a significant injustice. He told himself this was practical. He did not tell himself the truth, which was that he had been thinking about Emily Carter for 4 days, and he needed to understand why. He got out of the car and walked to the library. He stood outside for a moment. Through the window, he could see the interior. It was busier than he had expected. He could see people at the reading tables. He could see a group of older adults seated in a rough circle near the back, talking to each other with the animated engagement of people who have found something they had been missing. He could see a woman at the center of that group, her back to the window, her hands moving slightly as she spoke, And even from this distance and from behind, he knew it was Emily. He recognized the way she held herself. He went inside. The warmth hit him first. Not temperature. The building was not particularly warm. It was February, and the heating system was clearly doing its best and not quite succeeding, but the other kind of warmth, the kind that exists in places where people feel welcome. He stood near the entrance. The teenage boy at the nearest reading table looked up, took in Damien's suit, looked faintly puzzled by the juxtaposition of expensive tailoring and public library, and then went back to his textbook. Emily turned around. Their eyes met across the length of the library. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Emily walked toward him. Not hurriedly, not nervously, with the same steady, unhurried walk she had always had, the walk of someone who has decided how they're going to be in the world and is consistently being that way. She stopped 3 feet from him. She looked at him. "Mr. Vittorio." Her voice was even, not warm, not cold, even. Damien had delivered news that made grown men stagger. He had sat across negotiating tables from people whose entire financial futures were in his hands and never felt the need to explain himself. He felt inexplicably like he needed to explain himself. "I need a book," he said. Emily looked at him for a long moment. "You need a book," she repeated. "Yes." "You drove across Chicago to a small neighborhood library to get a book." "Yes." She studied him. He had the uncomfortable experience that one he was not accustomed to of feeling studied. "What kind of book?" she asked. Damien looked around the library. His eyes landed for no particular reason on a display near the window. A small handwritten sign above it read, "Things That Grow." "Gardening," he said. Emily's expression shifted. "Not much, just enough." "You want a gardening book?" "Yes." "You own," she said carefully, "multiple high-rise buildings and a penthouse apartment." "That's correct. None of which have gardens." "Not yet," he said. Something happened in Emily's eyes, something he couldn't quite name. Not warmth exactly, something more complicated than warmth. She turned and walked toward the shelving without another word. He followed. She pulled a book from the middle shelf and held it out to him. It was worn at the corners, clearly well-loved, clearly checked out many times. "This one starts from the very beginning," she said. "It assumes you know nothing." He took it from her. "Thank you," he said. She looked at him. "Library cards are free," she said. "Fill out the form at the front desk." And she turned and walked back toward her senior reading group. Damien stood holding a gardening book and watched her go. He filled out the library card form. He checked out the book. He drove back across Chicago. And that night, for the first time in longer than he could remember, he read something that had nothing to do with business. He read about soil composition and root systems and what things need in order to grow in hostile environments. He found himself reading the same paragraph 3 times, the one about how certain plants develop the strongest root systems, not in fertile ground, but in difficult soil, because difficulty forces the roots to reach further and push deeper and find what they need even when it is not easily available. He set the book down. He thought about Emily Carter. He thought about the woman he had watched walk out of a room with nothing but a box and her dignity. And he thought about how she had turned around and built something new in less than a week. He picked up the phone and called Marcus. "How close are you?" he asked. 20 hours, Marcus said. "I need to know who sent me the document," Damien said. "The anonymous one." A pause. "That might take longer." "Make it not take longer," Damien said. He hung up. He picked up the gardening book again. He thought about difficult soil. The next morning, Damien returned to Rosewood Library. He told himself it was to return the book, although he had only had it for 1 day. Emily was at the front desk when he came in. She looked up, saw him, and her expression did the thing again, that complicated thing that was not quite surprise and not quite suspicion. "Mr. Vittorio." "I finished it," he said, setting the book on the desk. She looked at the book. She looked at him. "In 1 day." "I read quickly." She picked up the book and examined the spine the way librarians do, checking automatically for damage. "What did you think?" she asked. It was such a simple question, the kind of question she probably asked everyone who returned a book. "Look, I think," Damien said slowly, "that I didn't understand how much work goes into growing something before you can see any evidence of it from the outside." Emily was quiet. "Most people don't," she said finally. She set the book down. "Did you want another?" "Yes," he said. "Something different." She looked at him for a moment. Then she walked into the stacks. She came back with 2 books. She held them out without explanation. He took them both. Thank you, he said. She nodded. He turned to leave. Mr. Vittorio. He stopped. He turned back. Emily was looking at him with an expression he had never seen on her face in 7 years of occasional encounters. It was the expression of someone deciding whether to say something true. Whatever you came here to figure out, she said quietly, I hope you find it. She turned back to the desk. He stood there for 1 second longer than was probably natural. Then he left. Outside, sitting in his car, he pressed both hands flat against the steering wheel and stared through the windshield. He had faced men who had tried to ruin him. He had navigated situations that had broken people with more resources and more experience. He had made decisions that most people would have found impossible. He was thoroughly unsettled by a librarian who gave him books and told him she hoped he found what he was looking for. He drove back to the foundation. Marcus was waiting in his office. I have what you asked for, Marcus said. He laid a folder on the desk. Damien opened it. 12 pages became 27. The story they told was methodical and deliberate and genuinely impressive in its scope. If impressive was a word you could apply to something that made you feel the particular cold anger of a man who has been carefully and skillfully used. Victoria had been building the case against Emily for 14 months. 14 months of small manipulations, slightly altered records, redirected expenditures, carefully placed suggestions to board members, quiet conversations that planted seeds of doubt without ever saying anything that could be directly challenged. She had not acted alone. Marcus had identified 2 other employees who had assisted in the financial manipulation, both from the accounting department, both with financial incentives that traced back to a private account Victoria had established through a third party. The entire operation had been running for over a year, and Emily had never seen it coming because Emily had been doing exactly what she always did, paying attention to the people around her and trusting that the institution she served was worthy of that attention. Damien closed the folder. Victoria doesn't know we have this, he said. It was not a question. No, Marcus said. Keep it that way. Marcus nodded. And the anonymous source, Damien asked. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Rosa Mendez, he said, library assistant. She found inconsistencies in records she had incidental access to about 3 months ago. She didn't understand what she was seeing at the time. After Emily was fired, she went back and looked again. Damien absorbed this. Rosa Mendez, who had cried in the break room, who had shelved books with mechanical precision while her heart was breaking, who had gone back quietly alone without telling anyone, and done the thing that Emily herself had not been in a position to do, which was look at the numbers without the blindfold of trust. She took a significant risk, Damien said. She did, Marcus agreed. Damien was quiet for a moment. Make sure she knows it was worth it, he said. Quietly, nothing that puts her in a difficult position. Marcus nodded and left. Damien sat alone in his office. He thought about 14 months of deliberate, patient, methodical betrayal. He thought about the way Victoria had smiled in the conference room. He thought about Rosa going back to look at the numbers alone. I thought about Emily and Rosewood Library with the Warren gardening book and the reading group and the homework help sessions and the 3 programs launched in the first week after the worst day of her professional life. He thought about all of it, and then he picked up his phone and called his attorney. I need you to prepare something, he said. He told his attorney what he needed prepared. There was a silence on the other end of the line. Damien Lodge, his attorney said carefully, this is going to be very public. Yes, Damien said. Victoria will fight it. I'm counting on it. Another pause. And Emily Carter, does she know any of this is happening? Damien looked out his window at the Chicago skyline. Not yet, he said. He thought about the woman in the library who had told him she hoped he found what he was looking for. Not yet, he said again. But soon, very soon. Because the annual Vittorio Foundation Charity Gala was in 3 weeks, and Damien had just decided exactly what he was going to do with it. He set his phone down. He opened the desk drawer. He looked at the 12-page document for the last time. Then he looked at the 27-page report Marcus had delivered. He placed them side by side. And for the first time since this had begun, since the morning he had said one cold word to a woman who deserved none of this, Damien, Vittorio felt something that he was not entirely accustomed to feeling. Not guilt, not strategy, not the cold calculus of a man correcting an error. Something closer to urgency. something that felt, if he was honest with himself, like the specific discomfort of a person who has realized that someone matters to them in a way they did not anticipate and cannot entirely explain. He did not examine that feeling too closely. He simply allowed it to exist, and he began to plan. 3 weeks. That was how long Damien had before the gala. 21 days to build a case so airtight that Victoria Reynolds would have nowhere to run, nowhere to deflect, nowhere to hide behind the smooth professional armor she wore like a second skin. 21 days to make sure that when the truth came out, it came out completely in front of everyone who mattered in a way that could never be walked back or quietly managed or spun into something more convenient. Damien had dismantled more complex operations than this, but he had never done it for a reason that felt this personal. He didn't examine that too carefully. He was not a man who spent significant time examining his own motivations. He identified what needed to be done, and he did it. That had always been enough. It was becoming slightly less enough with every passing day. On the Monday of the second week, Marcus came back with 3 additional names. 2 from accounting as previously identified, and 1 from the communications department who had been responsible for selectively editing the documentation that Victoria had presented to the board. The communications employee had also been the one to schedule the board meeting at the shortened notice, ensuring that Emily had no time to prepare a defense, even if she had known one was necessary. 14 months of architecture. Every piece deliberate, every piece designed to be plausibly deniable on its own and devastating in combination. Damien read the full report at his desk at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night and felt the specific quality of anger that only comes when you realize the scale of what you missed. Not explosive anger, cold anger, the kind that sits in your chest like something heavy and weights. Han had built his entire career on reading situations accurately, on seeing the shape of things before other people saw them, on understanding that the most dangerous threats were never the ones that announced themselves. Victoria had announced herself as an ally. She had been the most dangerous thing in the building, and he had handed her exactly the opportunity she needed by being exactly who he was, a man who trusted documents over people who read numbers instead of faces, who believed that evidence was cleaner than testimony because evidence couldn't lie. Evidence, it turned out, could absolutely lie if someone patient enough built it carefully enough over 14 months. He set the report down. I thought about Emily, who had walked into that conference room with a folder full of genuine work and genuine belief, and had sat there while a lie constructed over more than a year dismantled her professional life in under 30 minutes. He thought about the gardening book, about difficult soil and roots that grow deeper when they have to reach further. He picked up his phone. He sent one message to his attorney. 3 words. Move it up. The attorney called back in 4 minutes. Move it up to when? The attorney asked. This Saturday, Damien said. A silence. Damien, the gala is in 10 days. If we move the internal review up to Saturday, Victoria will know something is happening. She has people inside the foundation. She will find out. Good, Damien said. Another silence, longer this time. You want her to know it's coming, the attorney said slowly. I want her to spend 10 days knowing something is coming and not knowing exactly what it is, Damien said. I want her to spend 10 days making decisions under pressure. He paused. People who make decisions under pressure make mistakes, he said. And I want her mistakes on record before we walk into that gala. The attorney exhaled. All right, he said. Saturday. On Wednesday morning, and Emily arrived at Rosewood Library to find Deshawn waiting outside the door 40 minutes before it opened. She stopped. Deshawn. She looked at him. He was wearing the same jacket he always wore, which was not heavy enough for February, and he had his backpack over one shoulder and an expression that he was working very hard to keep neutral. What's going on? He shrugged. Nothing. I just came early. You came 40 minutes early on a Wednesday. Yeah. Emily unlocked the door. She let him in. She did not push because she had learned a long time ago that teenagers told you things on their own timeline, and pushing only moved the timeline further away. She made coffee in the back. She brought him a cup of hot chocolate from the small machine they kept for the Saturday story hour children. She set it next to him without comment. He wrapped both hands around the cup. She sat down across from him and opened her own coffee and waited. It took about 4 minutes. My mom lost her job, he said. He was looking at the table, not at her. Emily was quiet. She worked at the hospital, front desk. They downsized. He stopped, started again. She's been looking for 3 weeks. She hasn't told me and my sister, but I found the papers on the table. Emily said nothing for a moment. How old is your sister? She asked. 9. Emily nodded slowly. She thought about a 17-year-old who found financial papers on a table and came to the library 40 minutes early because he needed somewhere to sit with what he'd found and didn't know who else to bring it to. You're scared, she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was just the truth said plainly. Deshawn's jaw tightened. I'm fine. Deshawn, he looked up. You're allowed to be scared, she said. That's not weakness. That's just being a person. Something shifted in his face. Not much. Just a slight release of something he'd been holding. She's going to figure it out, Emily said. And while she's figuring it out, you're going to keep doing what you're doing, showing up, working hard, not letting fear make the decisions. He was quiet. Is there anything practical she needs? Emily asked. Job search resources, resume help, anything I can actually do. He blinked, like it hadn't occurred to him that help could be that direct. She's not great with computers, he said. Tell her to come in Thursday evening. I'll sit with her. He looked at her. You do that, Deshawn, Emily said. That is exactly what I'm here for. He picked up the hot chocolate. He drank it. Some of the tension went out of his shoulders. Thanks, Miss Carter, he said. Thank me by passing that history exam, she said. He almost smiled. That was Wednesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, something else was happening entirely. Victoria Reynolds was standing in her office on the executive floor of the Vittorio Foundation, and she was not smiling. Her assistant, a young woman named Claire, who had learned very quickly that her job primarily consisted of delivering information that Victoria wanted and absorbing the reaction to information. She didn't had just told her something that made the temperature in the room feel like it had dropped 10 degrees. He's called a full internal audit, Claire said. It was announced this morning, Saturday, all department heads required to submit documentation by Friday noon. Victoria looked at her. Which departments? Claire hesitated. All of them, she said. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Who authorized it? Mr. Vittorio, directly, not through the board. Victoria turned toward her window. Her mind was already moving, already assessing, already building the counter-architecture the way it always did when something unexpected appeared quickly and methodically and without the visible panic that other people showed in these moments, because panic was a luxury and Victoria Reynolds did not do luxury. An internal audit was not by itself a threat. She had managed internal audits before. The accounts she had used were structured to be confusing, spread across multiple sub-accounts, and filtered through a third-party administrator that existed specifically to make tracing difficult. But the timing, 3 weeks after Emily Carter's dismissal, 1 week after she had noticed through Claire and through her own careful attention to the building's undercurrents that Damien had been to Rosewood Community Library twice. Damien Vittorio, who had not set foot in the Foundation's own community library more than 3 times in 7 years, had driven across town and visited a financially struggling neighborhood library on 2 separate occasions in the space of 10 days. Victoria turned away from the window. Close the door, she said to Claire. Claire closed it. Victoria sat at her desk and thought. She was not frightened. She did not allow herself to be frightened because frightened people made reactive decisions, and reactive decisions left traces, and traces were what got you caught. She was alert. She was strategic. She was already identifying the 3 most likely angles from which this audit could cause her a problem. The third-party account was clean on paper. She had spent 6 months making sure it was clean on paper. The signature on the authorization documents was a professional forgery indistinguishable from Emily's, produced by someone Victoria had used before and had sufficiently compelling reasons to trust. The 2 accounting employees knew enough to be dangerous but had their own legal exposure and therefore their own reasons to stay quiet. The communications employee was the weakest link. She had always been the weakest link. Victoria had known that and accepted it as an acceptable risk at the time. She was reassessing that now. She reached for her phone. She made 3 calls over the next 20 minutes. They were brief calls, the kind of calls that do not say what they mean directly, that carry their meaning in the specific words chosen around the meaning, like a frame without a picture. After the 3rd call, she sat with the phone in her hand. An internal audit was manageable. Damien visiting Rosewood Library was manageable. But both things happening simultaneously in the same week in the same compressed window of time, 3 weeks after she had executed a plan she had been building for 14 months. That was not manageable. That was a message, and the message meant that Damien Vittorio already knew something. Victoria set the phone down. She did something she had not done in a very long time. She thought about what she had actually done. Not strategically, not in terms of risk management or exposure mitigation. She thought about what she had actually done to Emily Carter, the woman who had come to work every day with a folder and a genuine belief in what she was building. The woman who had remembered everyone's name. The woman who had spent 4 months on a literacy proposal that never got presented because Victoria had timed her move for exactly that meeting. Victoria sat with that for approximately 30 seconds. Then she closed the thought. Sentiment was a luxury. She had not come this far by allowing sentiment. She stood up, smoothed her jacket, and went back to work. Thursday came. Emily was at the front desk when Deshawn's mother walked in. Her name was Diane Washington, and she was 44 years old and held herself with the careful dignity of a woman who was not going to let anyone see how frightened she was if she could possibly help it. Emily recognized the posture immediately. She stood up and came around the desk and extended her hand. Mrs. Washington, I'm Emily. I'm glad you came. Diane shook her hand. Her grip was firm. Her eyes were the same eyes as Deshawn's, watchful and smart and trying not to show too much. Deshawn said you could help with the job search, Diane said. I don't want to take up too much of your time. You are exactly what my time is for, Emily said. Come sit down. They spent 2 hours at the computer together. Emily did not touch the keyboard unnecessarily. She sat beside Diane and walked her through each step rather than doing it for her because the point was not to produce a resume. The point was to produce a person who could navigate the process herself next time and the time after that. Diane had a degree in healthcare administration. She had 17 years of experience. She had excellent references. What she did not have was confidence that any of those things were enough, and Emily recognized that as the actual problem. You're listing your responsibilities, Emily said, looking at the resume draft. But look at this line here. You managed patient intake for a department that processed over 300 patients a day. That's not a responsibility. That's an achievement. Diane looked at the screen. I never thought about it like that, she said quietly. Most people don't, Emily said. We're taught to describe what we did, not what it meant. They worked through the entire resume. By the end, Diane was sitting up slightly straighter. She looked at Emily. Deshawn talks about you, she said. He talks about you more than he talks about his teachers. Emily smiled. He's a remarkable young man, she said. You should be proud. Diane's composure cracked just slightly. Just for a second. I am, she said. I just don't want him to see me failing. Emily was quiet for a moment. Mrs. Washington, she said gently, what he's seeing right now is his mother get up every morning and keep going. That is not failing. That is the most important thing he will ever watch you do. Diane pressed her lips together. She nodded. She picked up her purse. At the door, she turned back. Thank you, she said. Not in the perfunctory way people say thank you when they're leaving. In the way people say it when they mean something larger than the word can hold. Emily watched her go. Then she turned back to the desk and found Damien Vittorio standing 3 feet behind her. She had not heard him come in. She had been entirely focused on Diane and the resume and the conversation, and she had simply not registered the sound of the door. And now he was standing there in his dark coat with his hands in his pockets and the expression on his face that she was beginning to recognize as his version of something he was trying not to show. How long have you been standing there? She asked. Long enough, he said. She looked at him. That's not an answer. About 10 minutes, he said. Emily considered the information that Damien Vittorio had stood quietly for 10 minutes watching her help someone fix their resume. Did you need something? She asked. He was quiet for a moment. Can we talk? He said. Not here, somewhere private. Emily studied him. She had a very good sense of people she always had, and what she was reading from Damien right now was not the controlled authority he usually projected. It was something more like urgency wearing the mask of control. The library closes at 8, she said. There's a coffee place 2 blocks north. He nodded. 8 o'clock, he said. He left. Emily stood at the front desk and looked at the door he had just walked through. Something was happening. She could feel it the way you feel a shift in weather. Not seeing it yet, but sensing it in the air, in the particular quality of pressure. She went back to work. At 8:15, they were sitting across from each other in a corner booth at a coffee place that was almost empty on a Thursday evening, the kind of place where the music is low enough to talk over and nobody pays attention to anyone else. Damien had ordered black coffee. Emily had ordered tea because she was not going to sleep anyway, and caffeine at least gave her insomnia a productive quality. He had not said anything since they sat down. Emily waited. She was good at waiting. Finally, he said, "I need to tell you something." "All right," she said. He looked at her directly. "The evidence Victoria presented against you was fabricated." Emily did not move. "I know," she said. Damien stopped. He had not expected that. "You know," he repeated. "I know I didn't do what she said I did," Emily said. "I know the numbers she presented weren't real. I couldn't prove it then, and I couldn't prove it from outside the Foundation's records." She paused. "Did you find proof?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said. Emily absorbed this. She wrapped both hands around her tea. "How long have you known?" she asked. "I received an anonymous document the morning after the board meeting," he said. "I've spent 2 weeks verifying it." 2 weeks. "You've known for 2 weeks," Emily said. "I needed it to be airtight," he said. "I needed every piece verified before I moved. If I had gone to the board with incomplete evidence, Victoria would have had room to contest it." Emily looked at him. "And now?" she asked. "The gala is in 10 days, he said. "I am going to present everything at the gala, in front of every board member, every major donor, every person who was in that conference room." Emily was quiet. Outside the coffee shop window, the city moved past in its usual indifferent way. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. He looked like he was working through an answer he hadn't entirely prepared. "Because you deserve to know," he said. "That's not the only reason," Emily said. He paused. "No," he admitted. Emily looked at him. "Then what's the other reason?" He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. "Because I owe you an apology," he said, "and I didn't want to deliver it in a room full of people before you'd heard it privately first." Emily felt something shift inside her chest. Not forgiveness, it was too soon and too complicated for something as clean as forgiveness. Something else. Something like the recognition that this was harder for him than it looked and that he was doing it anyway. "You fired me without asking me a single question," she said. "Yes." "In front of 40 people?" "Yes." "You said no when I asked why?" "Yes." His voice was level, but something in it was not level. "All of that is true, and none of it is defensible." Emily looked at her tea. "You believed her," she said. "You believed the documents." "I always believe documents," he said. "It's a habit that has served me well in most situations. And in this one, he said quietly, it caused serious harm to someone who didn't deserve it." Emily was quiet for a moment. "Victoria built that case for 14 months, Emily said. Damien looked at her. "You knew it was her," he said, "not a question." "I suspected," Emily said. "I didn't have proof. And I didn't have access to the records that would have shown the proof even if I'd known to look." She paused. "Someone got you the document anonymously." "Rosa," he said. Emily closed her eyes for 1 second. Rosa, who had cried in the break room, who had told Emily on the phone 2 days after everything happened that she was fine and not to worry, and that she would take care of the Thursday reading group. Who had said all of that in a voice that was working very hard to sound like someone who was fine. "Is she all right?" Emily asked. "She's safe," Damien said. "She took a significant risk. I'm making sure it doesn't cost her." Emily nodded. They were quiet for a moment. "The gala," Emily said. "You're going to do this publicly?" "Yes." "Why not just terminate her quietly? Most people in your position would manage this internally." Damien looked at her. "Because it happened publicly," he said. "What was done to you happened in front of witnesses. The correction should happen in front of the same witnesses." Emily looked at him for a long time. "You know, Victoria's going to fight it," she said. "She has resources. She has relationships with board members. She's been building her position inside that foundation for years." "I know," he said. "She's not going to go quietly." "I'm not asking her to go quietly," Damien said. "I'm giving her nowhere to go at all." Something in his voice when he said it made Emily understand, perhaps for the first time, the full weight of what it meant to be Damien Vittorio. Not the fear other people attached to his name, not the reputation or the power or the carefully maintained distance. The actual quality of him, the way his mind worked, the specific and complete thoroughness with which he approached something he had decided to do. She had always treated him like a person. She had perhaps underestimated which person he was capable of being. Damien, she said, it was the first time she had used his first name. He noticed. She could see that he noticed. What is it going to look like for you, she asked, standing up at your own gala and telling the room that your executive director defrauded the foundation and you didn't see it for 14 months. What does that cost you? He looked at her steadily. Considerably less than what it cost you when I didn't ask for your side of the story, he said. Emily held his gaze. That's a good answer, she said. It's the true one, he said. They sat quietly for a moment with that between them. Then Emily said, there's something I need to tell you. He waited. The literacy program, she said. The proposal I had in that folder. The one I was going to present the day you fired me. Yes, he said. I read the summary in your personnel file. Emily looked at him. You read my personnel file. I read everything, he said, not defensively, as a statement of fact. The program would have put books into 12 neighborhoods that have almost no library access, she said. There are children in those neighborhoods who are going to fall behind in school this year because of it. Not because of what Victoria did to me personally, because the program never happened. Damien was quiet. I want it to happen, Emily said. Whatever else comes out of this. Whatever you do at the gala, whatever happens to Victoria, I want those children to get the books. He looked at her. I can make that happen, he said. I know you can, she said. I'm asking you to. Something crossed his face, something she thought might have been respect, though on Damien it was hard to distinguish from something more complicated. It'll happen, he said. Emily nodded. She picked up her tea. I'm not going to thank you for investigating something that should never have needed investigating in the first place, she said. I'm not asking you to, he said. Good, she said. They finished their drinks. Outside on the sidewalk, they stood for a moment. The gala, Emily said. Am I going to be there? He looked at her. That depends, he said. Do you want to be? Emily thought about the conference room, about the silence, about 40 faces looking away. She thought about Rosa going back to look at the numbers alone. She thought about Deshaun with his headphones and his history assignment and his jacket that wasn't heavy enough for February. She thought about Diane Washington sitting up straighter as the resume took shape. She thought about what Judith had said, that the position had been open for 2 years specifically for Emily, that the door had always been open. She thought about all the things she had built in the 3 weeks since the worst day of her professional life. She thought about difficult soil. Yes, she said, I want to be there. Damien nodded once. I'll have an invitation sent, he said. He turned to go. Damien. He stopped. He turned back. Emily looked at him in the cold night air of a Chicago February, and she said the thing that was true. You came to the library, she said, twice, before you'd told me any of this, before the audit, before the coffee. He held her gaze. Yes, he said. Why, she asked. He was quiet for a long moment. The city moved around them, indifferent and continuous the way it always did. Because I needed to see that you were all right, he said. Emily looked at him, and he paused. And he said quietly, because you're the only person I've ever met who looked at me like I was something other than what I'm afraid I am. He said it plainly, without performance, without the careful construction of a man managing an impression. He said it the way people say things they have thought about for a long time and finally said out loud and cannot now unsay. Emily did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, I should get home. Yes, he said. Good night, Damien. Good night, Emily. She walked. He stood on the sidewalk and watched her go and felt the specific weight of a man who has been honest about something for the first time in longer than he can remember and has no idea what comes next. He stood there until she turned the corner. Then he got in his car. He drove back through Chicago in the dark. He thought about 10 days. He thought about Victoria. He thought about the gala. And underneath all of that, underneath the strategy and the planning and the specific cold precision with which he was going to take apart everything Victoria had built, he thought about a woman who had looked at him like he was something other than what he was afraid he was. And he thought about how for the first time in as long as he could remember, that didn't feel like a threat. It felt like something worth protecting. Saturday came. The internal audit launched at 9 in the morning. By noon, 3 of Victoria's supporting employees had been placed on administrative leave. By 2 in the afternoon, Victoria herself had received formal notification that she was under investigation for financial fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and falsification of employment records. By 4 o'clock, she had retained an attorney. By 5, her attorney had contacted Damien's attorney with an offer to settle quietly. Damien's attorney called Damien. Damien said 2 words, "Tell her no." He hung up. He looked out his window at the city. 10 days. Victoria had 10 days to understand that there was no settlement coming, no quiet management, no behind closed doors resolution that let her walk away with her reputation intact and the damage contained. She had stood in a conference room and pointed at Emily Carter and said, "Get her out." She was going to stand in a room full of the same people and watch Damien Vittorio take apart every lie she had built piece by piece in front of all of them. That was not cruelty. That was the specific mathematics of justice. What happened in public required a public answer. Damien had learned that much from an innocent woman with a box of 3 things and a proposal in a folder that never got presented. I was not going to make that mistake again. The invitation arrived at Rosewood Community Library on a Tuesday morning, 9 days after the coffee shop conversation. Emily was shelving books in the back when Judith came to find her holding a cream-colored envelope between 2 fingers, like she wasn't entirely sure what to do with it. "This came by courier," Judith said. "Hand-delivered. The man who brought it was wearing a suit that cost more than my car." Emily wiped her hands on her cardigan and took the envelope. Her name was written on the front in clean, precise handwriting. Not printed. Written. Like someone had taken actual time with it. She opened it. The Vittorio Foundation Annual Charity Gala. This Saturday, 7 o'clock. A single card with her name embossed at the top and a handwritten line beneath the printed details that said simply, "Your presence matters." DV Judith was watching her face. "Do I want to know?" Judith asked. Emily looked at the card for a moment longer. "He's going to expose Victoria at the gala," she said quietly. Judith was silent. "In front of everyone," Emily added. Judith absorbed this. "And he's inviting you to watch," Judith said. "Yes." Judith looked at her carefully. "How do you feel about that?" Emily thought about the conference room, about Victoria's hand flat on the table sliding a folder toward Damien, about the specific quality of the silence that had followed and the specific quality of Damien's voice when he said one word that ended 7 years of her professional life. "I feel like I need to be there," Emily said. Judith nodded once. The nod of a woman who has lived long enough to understand that some moments require your presence, even when your presence costs you something. "Then go," Judith said, "and wear something that makes you feel like yourself." Emily looked. "Not something that makes me look like I belong in their world?" she asked. "Honey," Judith said, "you already belong in every world you walk into. That has never been the problem." Emily put the invitation in her cardigan pocket and went back to shelving books. But her mind was already in a room she hadn't entered in weeks, surrounded by people she had once known and standing in the specific, complicated position of a woman who had been wronged and was about to watch justice happen and was not yet sure how she felt about the fact that justice in this case was being delivered by the man who had wronged her. Life, Emily thought, rarely arranged itself into clean categories. By Wednesday, the foundation was quietly coming apart at the seams. Marcus had confirmed that Victoria's 2 accounting accomplices, having been presented individually with the full scope of the evidence against them, had each independently made the decision to cooperate with the internal investigation. They had done this on Wednesday morning within 40 minutes of each other without knowing the other had done the same. Marcus had specifically arranged it that way. Separate rooms, separate conversations. The specific methodology of a man who understood that parallel confessions obtained without coordination were significantly more difficult to challenge in any subsequent legal proceeding. By Wednesday afternoon, Damien had statements from both of them. He read them in his office with the door closed. The statements were detailed. They covered 14 months of specific actions, specific dates, specific account numbers, and specific instructions received from Victoria Reynolds. They covered the meeting in which Victoria had explained the plan. They covered the payments that had followed. They covered the moment 8 weeks before the board meeting when Victoria had told them that everything was ready and that the timing had been selected to coincide with Emily's literacy program presentation, specifically because the contrast between a woman presenting genuine work and the revelation of financial wrongdoing would make the accusation more visceral and more memorable. She had timed it to hurt more. Damien set the statements down. He pressed his fingers flat against the desktop and held them there for a moment. I had known people who operated without conscience. He had encountered them throughout his career in the specific way that people in his world encountered them, as obstacles to be managed, as threats to be neutralized, as variables to be accounted for. He was not a naive man. He did not have a simple moral framework that divided people cleanly into good and bad. But there was something in the detail of what Victoria had done, the deliberateness of the timing, the calculation behind choosing that specific moment for maximum emotional damage, that produced in him a response he did not often feel. Genuine disgust. He picked up his phone and called his attorney. I have 2 corroborating statements, he said, one from each accomplice. I need them secured and certified before Saturday. Done, his attorney said. What about the communications employee? She retained her own counsel yesterday. Her attorney contacted me this morning, and she's cooperating in exchange for reduced charges, Damien said. I accepted. That gives us 3 corroborating witnesses, plus the documentary evidence, plus the IP trace, his attorney said. Damien, this is comprehensive. You don't need the gala. You could take this directly to the board Thursday morning and have Victoria terminated by noon. Damien was quiet for a moment. I know, he said. Then why the gala? Damien looked at the window. Because the board isn't the only audience that needs to see this, he said. Every major donor in this city was in that conference room when Emily was fired. Every journalist who covers the foundation's work was invited to that meeting. They all watched it happen. They are all going to the gala. He paused. The correction needs the same audience as the mistake. His attorney was quiet. All right, he said finally. Saturday it is. On Thursday afternoon, something unexpected happened. Emily was locking up the library at 7:30 when her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Then she answered. Emily Carter. The voice was female, clipped, controlled. But underneath the control, something that was very close to desperate. Emily recognized the voice immediately. Victoria, she said, a pause. I need to meet with you, Victoria said. Tonight if possible, tomorrow at the latest. Emily stood completely still on the library sidewalk with her keys in her hand and the February cold settling around her shoulders. Why, she said, because I think there are things that need to be said between us before Saturday, Victoria said. Directly, without lawyers or boards or whatever Damien Vittorio has planned for that evening. Emily thought about it. She thought about it for exactly the amount of time it took her to understand what this call actually was. It was not remorse. It was strategy. Victoria was trying to get to Emily before the gala. She wanted to control the narrative. She wanted to find out what Emily knew, what Damien had told her, how much evidence existed. She wanted to sit across from Emily Carter and read her face and come away with information she could use. Emily understood all of that, and she made a decision. Tomorrow, Emily said. Noon. The coffee place on Halsted, 2 blocks from Rosewood. I'll be there. She hung up. Then she called Damien. He answered on the second ring. Victoria just called me, she said. A silence. What did she want? He said, and his voice had shifted into something very still and very precise. To meet before the gala, Emily said. She said there are things that need to be said between us directly. She's going to try to find out what you have. Are you going to meet her? He asked. Yes, Emily said. Tomorrow noon. Another silence. Emily. His voice was careful. You don't have to do this. I know, she said. I want to. She's going to try to manipulate you. I know that too, Emily said. I've been reading people my entire professional life, Damien. I think I can handle one conversation with Victoria Reynolds. A pause. All right, he said, but I want you to know something before you go. What? Whatever she tells you, whatever she offers you or threatens you with or tries to make you feel, it doesn't change what happens Saturday. Emily was quiet for a moment. I know, she said. She said good night and hung up. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment longer, with the cold around her and the city moving past indifferent as always, and thought about what it meant to sit across from the woman who had dismantled her life with methodical patience over 14 months. Then she went home. She was not afraid. She was something more complicated than afraid. She was awake and alert and honest with herself, in the way she was always honest with herself, which was that some situations required you to walk directly into the thing you would prefer to avoid, not because you were unafraid of it, but because you understood that avoidance was just a slower form of defeat. Friday noon, the coffee place on Halsted. Emily arrived first. She ordered tea. She sat with her back to the wall, not for any tactical reasons, simply because she preferred to see the door. Victoria came in at 3 minutes past 12. She was dressed with the same impeccable care she always brought to her appearance, which was either a sign of genuine composure or a very practiced performance of it. She sat down across from Emily without preamble and ordered coffee without looking at the menu, the specific efficiency of a woman who did not want to be in this situation any longer than necessary. They looked at each other. "Thank you for coming," Victoria said. "You called me," Emily said. Victoria acknowledged this with a slight tilt of her head. "I know what Damien has," she said. "I know about the statements. I know about the IP trace. I know about the audit findings." She was watching Emily's face as she spoke very carefully, the way a person watches a face when they're trying to extract information from the reaction rather than the words. "I need to understand what your involvement is going to be on Saturday." "My involvement," Emily repeated. "You've been to the library twice. You had coffee with him Thursday night last week." Victoria said it flatly, without accusation, the way you state facts you have gathered. "I need to know what you've agreed to." Emily looked at her. "Victoria," she said calmly, "you built a 14-month case to destroy my professional reputation. You used my work against me. You timed the accusation to happen during my most important presentation. You had my signature forged." She paused. "What did you think was going to happen?" Something crossed Victoria's face. Not guilt. Something more complex. Something that looked briefly like the expression of a person who has been so focused on winning that they forgot to account for consequences. "I needed you out," Victoria said. "Your presence in that foundation undermined everything I was building." Emily looked at her steadily. "I ran a community library. How did I undermine anything you were building?" "Because people liked you," Victoria said, and for the first time her voice had something raw in it, something that had not been polished away. "The board liked you. The donors liked you. Damien walked through that library voluntarily more times than he ever attended a board meeting I ran. You had influence in that organization that you didn't even know you had, and you were completely oblivious to it, which somehow made it worse." Emily was quiet. She thought about that. Well, she thought about the way the room had gone silent when Damien said her name, about the board members who had looked away, about the donors who had watched without speaking. "The people who liked me," Emily said slowly, "didn't defend me when you accused me. Every person who supposedly had that much goodwill toward me sat in that room and stayed silent." Victoria looked at her. "That's how it works," Victoria said. And for a moment underneath the defense and the strategy and the desperation, there was something almost honest in her voice. "Goodwill doesn't translate into action when action is costly. You of all people should know that." Emily thought about Deshaun staying late to help his mother that he couldn't admit he knew about Rosa going back to look at the numbers alone at night, about Judith holding a position open for 2 years without pressure or ultimatum. "Some people acted," Emily said quietly. Victoria's jaw tightened. "I'm going to fight this," Victoria said. "I have resources and I have relationships and I have legal standing to contest every piece of evidence on grounds of improper collection. This is not over." "I know you believe that," Emily said. "I'm telling you this because I want you to understand what the next 6 months are going to look like if this goes forward the way Damien intends." Victoria leaned forward slightly. "Depositions, countersuits, your name in connection with a legal proceeding that will be covered by every journalist who covers Chicago's nonprofit sector. Even as a victim, Emily, even as the wrong party, your name attached to this will affect your ability to work in this field for years." Emily looked at her. "Is that a threat?" she asked. "It's a reality," Victoria said. Emily wrapped both hands around her teacup. She thought about everything Victoria had just said. She thought about whether any of it was true. And then she thought about the grandmother who had cried quietly while reading to her grandchildren because she couldn't afford to take anything home. She thought about the 12 neighborhoods where children were falling behind because a literacy program had never been presented. She thought about the specific mathematics of silence, about how staying quiet to protect yourself from consequences is how the people who do harm continue to do harm. She put her tea down. "Victoria," she said, "I came here today because I wanted to look at you directly and say something I need you to hear." Victoria was watching her. "I don't hate you," Emily said. "I genuinely don't. What you did to me was deliberate and thorough, and it caused real damage. Not just to me, to the programs, to the children, to Rosa, who risked her job to fix something she didn't create." She paused. "But hate would require me to spend energy on you that I would rather spend on something that actually matters." Victoria was very still. "Saturday is going to happen," Emily said. "Not because I want revenge, because what happened in public requires a public answer. And because the people who were in that room deserve to know the truth as much as they witnessed the lie." She picked up her purse. She stood up. "I'm sorry that your ambition cost you this much," Emily said. "I mean that. I don't think you started out wanting to be the kind of person who forges signatures and frames colleagues. I think you wanted something legitimate, and somewhere along the way, you decided the ends justified the means." She looked at her directly. "They don't. They never did." She left enough money on the table for both drinks. She walked out. On the sidewalk, she stopped for one breath. Her hands were shaking slightly. Not from fear, from the specific physical aftermath of saying something true in a situation where there was no protection and no guarantee and no way to know how it would land. She breathed. She walked back to the library. When she got back, Judith was at the desk. Judith looked at her face and didn't ask anything. She simply went to the back and came out with 2 cups of real coffee and set one in front of Emily without a word. Emily looked at her. "Thank you," she said. Judith shrugged. "Sometimes you just need coffee." Emily sat down and drank it. That evening, she called Damien. "How did it go?" he asked. "She threatened litigation," Emily said. "She said the legal proceedings would affect my ability to work in the field for years, even as the wronged party." A silence. "Is that going to change anything for you?" he asked. Emily thought about it honestly. "No," she said. She heard him exhale. Not dramatically. Just a slight release of something. "She's going to fight it," Emily said. "She has a legal team, and she's going to contest the evidence collection on procedural grounds, and it's going to be messy." "I know," he said. "Are you prepared for that?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "Damien," she said, "why did you build this to be public? Your attorney could have handled this without the gala. You know that." A pause. "Yes," he said. "So why?" I was quiet for a moment. "Because I made a mistake in public," he said. "Because I said one word in a room full of witnesses, and I didn't ask a single question, and I sent you out of that building in front of people who respected you. And because the man I want to be is not the man who corrects his mistakes in private to protect his own reputation." Emily was quiet. "That's a harder thing to say than most people would say," she said. "It's true," he said. "That makes it easier." She thought about that. She thought about Judith saying she already belonged in every world she walked into. She thought about difficult soil and roots that grew deeper because they had to reach further. "Saturday," she said. "I'll be there." "I know," he said. Saturday arrived the way important evenings always arrive, faster than expected and heavier than anticipated. Emily dressed at her apartment in the quiet of early evening. She wore a deep blue dress she had owned for 3 years and worn to every occasion that mattered to her. Not because it was expensive, it was not, but because it was the dress she felt most like herself in. She wore her hair the way she always wore it. She put on the earrings her mother had given her. She looked at herself in the mirror. She looked like Emily Carter. That was exactly right. The gala was held in the foundation's main hall, a large space that had been transformed by whoever the foundation hired to transform large spaces, flowers and candles and tables with white cloths, and the particular quality of ambient noise that comes from 300 people who know each other circulating in a room with good acoustics. Emily arrived at 7:15. She knew almost everyone, and almost everyone knew her. The first person who approached her was not a board member or a donor. It was James Whitfield, a 71-year-old retired attorney who had been a foundation donor for 20 years and who had been in the conference room that morning and had been one of the people who had looked away. He came towards her with his drink in his hand and something in his face that was not comfortable to look at but was at least honest. "Emily," he said. "James," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "I owe you an apology," he said, "for not speaking up." Emily looked at him. "Yes," she said, "you do." He nodded slowly. He had expected she could see some version of "it's all right" or "these things happen." He had not expected direct agreement. It seemed to settle something in him, actually the plain acknowledgement, the way honest difficulty, is sometimes easier to carry than comfortable deflection. I should have asked for the evidence to be reviewed, he said. I should have, at minimum, asked for time. Yes, Emily said again. I'm sorry, he said. And he meant it. She could hear that he meant it. I know you are, she said. Thank you for saying so. He moved on. She watched him go. 3 more people approached her in the next 20 minutes with versions of the same conversation. Not all of them were as direct as James. Some of them were more circuitous, more wrapped in social niceties that were designed to acknowledge wrongness without quite naming it. But they came. They came to her specifically. They sought her out in a room where they could easily have avoided her. That meant something. She was at the bar getting water when she felt the temperature of the room shift. The specific shift, she recognized the subtle recalibration of a room when Damien Vittorio enters it. She did not turn around immediately. She picked up her water. She breathed. She turned around. I was across the room near the entrance, speaking with 2 board members. He was wearing a dark suit, and the expression he always wore in professional settings contained authoritative, giving away nothing. His eyes were moving through the room the way they always did, steadily registering everything. They found her. He held her gaze for 1 second. She held it back. He looked away and continued his conversation. That was all. But something in that 1 second said everything that needed to be said before the evening truly began. Victoria arrived at 7:40. Emily heard the slight shift in the room's energy before she saw her. The small pulling of attention, the almost imperceptible ripple that moves through a crowd when someone arrives who everyone has been thinking about. Victoria walked in alone. No attorney, which surprised Emily. No ally at her side, which surprised her more. Just Victoria Reynolds, immaculate as always, composed as always, walking into a room full of people who had spent the week hearing things she did not want them to hear, with her chin level and her posture perfect. Whatever else she was, Emily thought the woman had extraordinary nerve. Their eyes met across the room. Victoria did not look away. Neither did Emily. Then the moment passed, and the evening continued around them both. At 8:30, Damien stepped to the front of the room. The crowd quieted naturally. He did not need to call for attention. He simply moved to stand at the podium, and the room organized itself around his presence the way rooms always did. Thank you all for being here tonight, he said. His voice was even, measured, entirely controlled. Before we move into the evening's program, I need to address something directly. Something that affects this foundation, its integrity, and its obligation to the people it serves. The room was very quiet. Emily set her water glass down on a nearby table. Several weeks ago, Damien said, I made a decision in this room that I now know to have been wrong. I terminated an employee based on evidence that I later discovered had been deliberately falsified. I did so without asking that employee a single question, without allowing her to see the evidence against her, without giving her any opportunity to respond. He paused. The employee was Emily Carter. Many of you were in this room when that happened. Emily felt the weight of 200 eyes moving to her. She stood still. She breathed. What I did not know at the time, Damien continued, was that the evidence had been manufactured over a period of 14 months by an individual within this organization who had a personal motive to remove Emily from her position. That individual used foundation resources, falsified financial records, forged signatures, and directed 2 additional employees to assist in the fraud. The room was absolutely still. Tonight I am formally announcing the termination of Victoria Reynolds as Executive Director of the Vittorio Foundation, effective immediately on grounds of financial fraud, falsification of records, and breach of fiduciary duty. I am also announcing that the evidence gathered during the internal investigation has been referred to the appropriate legal authorities. He looked up from the podium. He looked directly at Emily. Emily Carter was innocent, he said. She was innocent of every accusation made against her. She served this foundation with extraordinary dedication for 7 years, and she was wrongly dismissed from it in this room in front of many of you. That is a fact. And the fact that I allowed it to happen is something I intend to spend a significant amount of time making right. He stepped back from the podium. The room erupted. Not in applause, not immediately. In the specific noise of 300 people processing something significant all at once. Conversations, breaking out voices, rising the particular texture of a large group of people, rearranging their understanding of something they thought they already knew. Victoria had not moved from her position near the back of the room. Emily watched her. Victoria's attorney, Emily noticed, had appeared at some point during Damien's speech and was now standing very close to Victoria, speaking quietly into her ear. Victoria was listening with her eyes straight ahead and her composure intact, which was either the sign of a genuinely cold person or a deeply practiced one, and Emily had stopped being sure there was a difference. Then Damien walked toward Emily. The crowd parted slightly, the way crowds move when someone with that specific quality of authority moves through them with clear intent. He stopped in front of her. Around them, the noise of the room continued. Conversations, movement, the clink of glasses, the specific thrum of a significant event processing itself through 300 people simultaneously. But in the space between Emily and Damien, it was very quiet. "I owe you an apology," he said, not quietly, clearly enough that the people immediately around them could hear. "A real one, not managed, not private." Emily looked at him. "You fired me," she said. "Yes." "Without asking me anything." "Yes." "In front of everyone." "Yes," he said. "All of that is true, and all of it was wrong, and I am sorry, Emily. I am genuinely and completely sorry." The people near them had gone quiet. Emily looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the coffee shop, about difficult soil, about the book with the crease in the spine that told her he had read it more than once. She thought about one word in a conference room that had cost her everything she had built. She thought about what she had built afterward. She thought about whether she was willing to give this man, this complicated, difficult, extraordinary man who had driven across Chicago to borrow gardening books and stand quietly for 10 minutes, watching her help someone fix their resume, the thing he was asking for. "I know you are," she said finally. It was not forgiveness. Not yet. Forgiveness was a longer road than a single evening, and she was honest enough to know that. But it was something. It was the acknowledgement that what he had said was true and that she heard it, and that the door that his apology was asking to open was not in fact locked. He looked at her, and for the first time in a room full of people in the specific charged air of an evening that had just changed the shape of both their lives, Damien Vittorio's face did something it almost never did in public. It softened, just slightly, just enough. Around them, James Whitfield started to applaud. Then someone else. Then someone else. It moved through the room the way the right things move through rooms when people have been waiting to be given permission to feel them gradually and then all at once. Emily did not look around at the applause. She kept her eyes on Damien, and she thought about what Judith had said, that she already belonged in every world she walked into, that it had never been the problem. She thought Judith might have been right about that all along. Part 5. Lưu ý viết đủ 5.055 từ, liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện pha hội thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liên mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liên mạch với phần trước không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liên mạch. Sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ phong cách truyền Mỹ Hoa Kỳ giống văn giàu cảm xúc chân thực và gần gũi, không mô tả cảnh, tập trung vào hành động, cảm xúc và tâm lý nhân vật. Viết phần 5 đạt điểm 10 từ 10 và bổ sung tiết tấu câu chuyện nhanh, sửa lỗi ai. Kể theo ngôi thứ 3, giữ độ kịch tính, không viết lan man. Kết thúc dùng câu khẳng định mạnh để khép lại câu chuyện rõ ràng, trọn vẹn. Lưu ý trả lời trong một tin nhắn, không nhảy sang một document mới. 2-3 phút cần có mini climax và đặt 10-15 mini climax mỗi. Phần cứ 10-12 phút có một twist lớn sâu sắc đan xen, mini cliffhanger mạnh hơn. Thăng tính tự nhiên cho phản ứng của các nhân vật, thêm nhịp điệu, kịch tính thực tế và gần gũi. 18-10 phút cần có móc giữ chân khán giả. Lưu ý không mô tả cảnh, viết văn bản phù hợp với TDS và chỉ cần viết nội dung và viết đúng lệnh nhé. Show more part, what gets built from the ground up. The applause faded the way. Applause always fades gradually. People returning to their conversations the evening, reshaping itself around what had just happened, the way water reshapes around a stone dropped into it. But the room was different now. Everyone in it felt different. The specific weight of something true, having been said publicly in a space where a lie had once been delivered with the same confidence, sat in the air like a change in pressure. Emily picked up her water glass. Her hand was steady. She was grateful for that. Across the room, Victoria was gone. At some point during the applause, between one breath and the next, Victoria Reynolds had simply ceased to be present. Her attorney had presumably guided her out through a side exit, the quiet and efficient management of a departure that needed to happen without additional spectacle. Emily noticed the absence the way you notice when a sound you'd been hearing stops. Not with relief exactly, with something more like the recognition that a chapter had closed. James Whitfield appeared at her elbow. I want to say again, he started. James, Emily said gently. You already said it, and I heard it. That's enough. He looked relieved in the specific way of a man who had been carrying something and had been allowed to set it down. Around her, people came and went. Board members, donors, foundation employees who had watched the conference room scene weeks ago and were now navigating the complicated social mathematics of acknowledging wrongness without overplaying it. Emily met each conversation with the same steady warmth she brought to everything, not performing forgiveness. She didn't fully feel yet, not pretending the evening was uncomplicated, but being genuinely present in the way she was always genuinely present. That had never required perfect conditions. She had always simply been herself regardless of the conditions. Damien found her again at 9 o'clock. The formal portion of the evening had concluded, and the room had relaxed into the looser current of a late evening gathering voices. Louder, the ambient energy shifting from the tension of the announcement into something that was trying to become ordinary again. He appeared at her side without announcement and stood there for a moment without speaking, which she had come to understand was simply how he arrived in proximity to her, without preamble, without social lubrication, simply present. How are you doing? He asked. It was such a plain question, the kind of question anyone might ask. But from Damien, it carried the specific weight of a man who was asking because he genuinely needed the answer. I'm all right, Emily said. She thought about it more honestly. I'm better than I expected to be. James Whitfield apologized to you, Damien said. He did. 3 other board members also spoke to you in the first 20 minutes. Emily looked at him sideways. Were you watching? Yes, he said without any particular defensiveness about it. She almost smiled. And I noticed that you handled each conversation better than the people having it with you. Emily looked at her water glass. They were trying, she said. That counts for something. Most people wouldn't be generous about it, he said. Most people haven't spent 7 years learning that what someone does next matters more than what they failed to do before, she said. I was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I need to ask you something. Emily looked at him. There's a position, he said, Director of Community Education for the Foundation. It was a role I created 2 years ago and never filled because I couldn't find the right person. He paused. I know now that I couldn't find the right person because the right person was already working inside the foundation and I simply hadn't understood that yet. Emily was quiet. I'm offering it to you, he said, full authority over all community programs. Direct budget control, no intermediary between you and the board. And the literacy program, the one in your folder, the 12 neighborhoods. The children, all of it gets funded immediately. This week, if you say yes. Emily looked at him for a long time. She thought about Rosewood, about Judith and Gerald the heater, and the leaning shelf, and Deshawn and Helen in her blue coat, and Diane Washington sitting up straighter as her resume took shape. She thought about the Tuesday senior reading group and the Saturday story hour, and the Wednesday homework help that Deshawn had brought 2 friends to by the 3rd week. She thought about what she had built in a matter of weeks from almost nothing in a building held together by institutional optimism. She thought about what she could build with real resources. She thought about the 12 neighborhoods. She thought about the children. I have a condition, she said. Something in his expression shifted, not surprise, more like the recognition of something expected arriving at the expected moment. Rosewood Community Library, she said. Permanent funding, not a grant cycle, not a yearly review, permanent endowment sufficient to sustain full operations and expand programming. Damien didn't hesitate. Done, he said. Emily looked at him. Judith Mercer remains director of Rosewood, she said. I report to the foundation in my new role, but Rosewood operates independently under her leadership. Agreed, he said. And Rosa, Emily said. Rosa gets a formal commendation in her personnel file and a title adjustment that reflects what she actually does. She's been functioning as deputy librarian without the title or the compensation. Damien nodded once. Consider it done. Emily looked at her water. She thought about the morning after the worst day of her professional life. The kitchen table and the notepad and the question written at the top of the page. Not as a question, as a problem to solve. She had solved it. She was still solving it. Yes, she said. Damien looked at her. Yes, she said again more clearly. I'll take the position. Something happened in his face that she was getting better at reading. The slight release of something held. The shift of a man who had been waiting for an answer and is now finally holding it. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me yet, Emily said. I have very specific ideas about what community education should look like, and I have absolutely no intention of compromising them because they make the board uncomfortable. I know, he said. I mean it, Damien. If someone tries to cut a program because it serves people who don't look good in the annual report, I'm going to fight it. I know that too, he said, and the way he said it was not resignation. It was something closer to appreciation. Emily nodded. All right, she said. She set her water glass down. Now I'm going home, she said, because it has been an extremely long evening and I have a senior reading group at 10 tomorrow morning. Damien looked at her. It's Saturday tomorrow, he said. I know, she said. They look forward to it all week. I'm not canceling. He looked at her for a moment. The dedication you have to those programs, he said slowly. The way you talk about the people in them. You don't talk about them like they're beneficiaries of something. You talk about them like they're the point. Emily picked up her coat. They are the point, she said simply. She looked at him. Good night, Damien. Good night, Emily. She walked toward the exit. She was almost at the door when she heard him behind her. Emily. She turned. He was standing where she had left him across the room, and he looked for just a moment like a man who was not sure whether to say the next thing. He said it anyway. The gardening book, he said. The first one you gave me. I've read it 4 times. Emily looked at him. I know, she said. He blinked. How do you know? Because the second time you came in, the spine had 3 new creases, she said. Librarians notice things. She pushed open the door. She walked out into the February night. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment and breathed cold air and thought about the specific strangeness in the specific rightness of this evening and everything it had set in motion. Then she went home. 2 weeks later, the literacy program launched. Not quietly, not as a pilot, as a full program covering all 12 neighborhoods simultaneously with enough funding to put 6,000 books into circulation in the first month and enough infrastructure to sustain and expand it for years. Emily coordinated the launch from the foundation office she had begun occupying 2 weeks after the gala. It was a smaller office than the one she'd had before, which she had specifically requested because the larger offices on the executive floor felt disconnected from the work, too far from the people the work was actually for. The morning the first book deliveries went out, she received a text from a number she did not recognize. She almost didn't open it. She opened it. It was a photograph. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, sitting on a front stoop, holding a picture book with both hands and looking at the cover with the specific expression of a child encountering something that delights her in a way she doesn't yet have words for. The kind of look that exists only in the first few seconds of genuine wonder before self-consciousness has time to modify it. Beneath the photograph, a single line of text. This is Maya. She has been waiting for this book for 2 years. Thank you. Emily sat at her desk and looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she forwarded it to Damien with no message attached. He responded in 40 seconds. 4 words. This is the point. Emily looked at those 4 words. She thought about the man who had borrowed gardening books and stood quietly for 10 minutes watching someone. He owed an apology. Help a stranger. The man who had read about difficult soil at 11 o'clock at night and understood something about himself in the reading that he hadn't been looking for. The man who had chosen a public accounting over a private resolution because he understood that the form of the correction needed to match the form of the harm. That man had always been in there. He had simply needed someone to not look away from him long enough for him to find it. 3 months after the gala, Deshaun Washington passed his history exam, not barely passed with a score that made his teacher add a note to the grade that said, outstanding improvement. He came into the library on the Saturday after he got the grade back, and he was trying very hard not to look like someone whose world had just gotten significantly bigger, and he was not entirely succeeding. Emily was at the front desk. He slid the graded paper across the desk without saying anything. She looked at it. She looked at him. Deshaun, she said. Yeah, he said, examining the middle distance with great intensity. I'm proud of you, she said. His jaw worked. It's just history, he said. It's not just history, Emily had said. It's you deciding that understanding something matters. That is never just anything. He picked up the paper. He folded it carefully. He put it in his jacket pocket, the jacket that was still not heavy enough, for Chicago winters, but which he wore with the specific confidence of a 17-year-old who has decided the jacket is correct regardless of temperature. My mom got a job offer, he said, still looking at the middle distance. Emily felt something loosen in her chest. Where, she asked. Hospital on the north side, administrative coordinator. He paused. Better than the last one. Deshaun, Emily said. That is wonderful. He shrugged, but the shrug was the kind that covers a smile. She said to tell you thank you, he said. She said the resume thing the way you did it. She said she went into that interview feeling like herself. Emily sat with that for a moment, feeling like herself. That was the thing. That was always the thing. Not the resume, not the formatting, not the bullet points rearranged into achievements. The resume was just the tool. The actual work was helping someone remember that they were worth the effort of their own best presentation. Tell her I said congratulations, Emily said, and that the work was hers. I just sat next to her. Deshaun nodded. He stood there for a moment. Ms. Carter, he said. Why do you do this, he asked, and it was a genuine question. Not rhetorical. The question of a young person who is trying to understand what makes an adult choose one thing over another. Like, you could do other stuff. You're smart. You could have a different job. Emily thought about the question honestly. She thought about the grandmother with the picture book and the 4 grandchildren. She thought about Helen in the blue coat and the large print books she set out without being asked. She thought about Diane Washington sitting up straighter. She thought about Maya on the front stoop looking at a book cover with the expression that exists only before self-consciousness arrives. Because people matter more when they feel like they matter, she said. And sometimes all it takes is one person paying enough attention to make that true. I happen to be good at paying attention. Deshaun looked at her. That's it, he asked. That's everything, she said. He thought about it. Then he picked up his backpack. I'm going to do the Wednesday session still, he said, even though I passed. I know you are, Emily said. He left. Emily watched him go and felt the specific satisfaction of watching someone understand something real about themselves and carry it out the door with them. It was, she thought, better than almost anything she knew. On a Thursday afternoon in late April, Damien came to Rosewood. He had been coming every week since the gala. Sometimes he came on Tuesdays, sometimes Thursdays. Once he had appeared on a Saturday morning story hour, which had produced the memorable image of a man in a custom suit sitting in a small chair designed for 5-year-olds, while Emily read aloud to 12 children and 3 elderly visitors who had wandered in from the cold. He had not left early. He had stayed for the whole story. One of the children had asked him what his name was, and he had said Damien, and she had considered this and said that was a good name for a dragon, and he had looked briefly uncertain and then said thank you with complete seriousness, while Emily bit the inside of her cheek to keep from laughing. Today he came in at 2 in the afternoon and went to the reading section and picked up a book and sat in the chair by the window. Emily was helping a patron at the desk. She registered his arrival without acknowledging it in the way she had learned to acknowledge his presence as a steady thing, a given something. She had stopped questioning because it had simply become part of the texture of her days. When the patron left, she walked over. He looked up. You've been on the same page for 20 minutes, she said. He looked down at the book. I've been thinking, he said, about... He looked up at her. The board is asking about the new community education framework, he said. They want a formal presentation, budget projections, 5-year plan. I know, Emily said. I'm working on it. I know you are. He paused. I also know that what you've built in 3 months has already exceeded what the previous framework built in 3 years. Emily sat down in the chair across from him. Is that what you've been sitting here thinking about for 20 minutes? She asked. He was quiet. No, he said. She waited. I've been sitting here thinking about the fact that I come here every week, he said, and that I tell myself it's about the foundation's investment in Rosewood, and that it is not in any meaningful sense about the foundation's investment in Rosewood. Emily looked at him. No, she said, it's not. He held her gaze. I don't do this, he said. I don't come to places because I want to be there rather than because I need to be there. I don't sit in chairs thinking about things that aren't strategic. I don't read gardening books 4 times. And yet, Emily said, and yet he agreed. The library was quiet around them. Helen was in the large print section. A young man he didn't recognize was at one of the reading tables with a laptop and headphones. Gerald the heater made its 20-minute sound from somewhere in the back of the building, the sound that Judith had named and that Emily had come to find genuinely comforting. Damien, Emily said, "Yes, what are you trying to say?" He looked at her with the expression she had come to know as his version of being at the edge of something he was not sure how to cross. "That you matter to me, oi," he said, "in a way I didn't account for and can't manage into something more convenient. And that I am aware this is complicated given the specific history between us, and I am not asking you to respond to it in any particular way. I am simply telling you because I have learned recently that honesty said directly is better than silence said strategically." Emily was quiet for a moment. She thought about 7 years of him walking through the library with his hands clasped behind his back and his face unreadable. She thought about Neruda third shelf down second from the left. She thought about the crease in the spine that told her he had read it more than once. She thought about him standing on a sidewalk in February saying, "You're the only person I've ever met who looked at me like I was something other than what I'm afraid I am." She thought about what it cost a person like him to say a thing like that. She thought about what it cost her still to trust the room she was in. "It is complicated," she said. "I know," he said. "You fired me," she said. "That is a fact that doesn't stop being a fact because other things have happened." "I know that too," he said. "And I am not someone who moves past things quickly," she said. "I am someone who moves past things honestly, which takes longer." "I understand," he said, and she believed that he did. She looked at him. "But," she said, he was very still. "But I also know that the person who sat in a chair sized for a 5-year-old and took a child seriously when she told him Damien was a good name for a dragon is not the same person who said one word in a conference room and looked away." She paused. "And I know that people can be both of those things, and I know that what matters is which one they're choosing to be." He looked at her for a long moment. "Which one am I choosing?" he asked. "That's what I'm finding out," she said, "and so far, the evidence is in your favor." Something happened in his face that she thought she might spend a very long time learning to read correctly. "Is that enough?" he asked. "For now," she said. "Yes." He nodded slowly. He looked down at the book in his hands. "What page were you actually on?" she asked. He looked up. 43, he said. "The chapter about perennials," she said. "Yes." "What did you think?" He paused. "That some things look like they're gone in winter and come back in spring," he said. "And that the coming back is not a surprise to the plant. The plant always knew it was going to come back." Emily looked at him. "That," she said quietly, "is a very good reading of that chapter." He almost smiled. He went back to his book. Emily went back to her desk. She sat down. She organized the afternoon's returned books. She thought about perennials. She thought about things that look like they're gone and aren't. She thought about the morning she had stood on a sidewalk with a box of 3 things and given herself 30 seconds to feel the weight of everything and then started walking. She thought about where the walking had led. Judith came out from the back with 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of Emily without comment. Emily picked it up. She looked across the library to where Damien sat by the window, actually reading now. No longer thinking or performing the act of reading, but actually in the book the way she had always known you could tell the difference. Judith stood beside her for a moment. "He comes every week," Judith said quietly, not looking at Damien, looking at Emily. "I know," Emily said. "You going to do anything about that?" Emily drank her coffee. "I already am," she said. Judith made a sound that contained an entire opinion and walked back to the desk. Summer came to Chicago. The way summer always comes suddenly and completely, like the city had simply decided one morning to be a different place. The trees on Rosewood's block went from bare to full in what felt like a single week. The children from the Saturday Story Hour started appearing in the neighborhood without the winter coats they had worn all season, moving faster, louder, the specific unleashed energy of children for whom warmth is permission. The literacy program had now delivered 11,000 books to the 12 neighborhoods. Emily had the number on a sticky note on her desk, not because she needed it for a report, because she looked at it in the morning, 11,000. She thought about Maya on the front stoop, 11,000 Mayas. The Foundation's board had approved the 5-year community education framework at their June meeting. It had passed unanimously, which was notable because the board did not unanimously pass anything. After the vote, James Whitfield had caught Emily in the hallway, and said that in 40 years of foundation work, he had never seen a framework presented with that level of both rigor and humanity, and that the combination was rarer than people assumed. Emily had thanked him. She had meant it more than she once would have. On a Friday evening in late June, Damien appeared at Rosewood 20 minutes before closing. Emily was doing the final round of the library, the nightly check she always did herself, moving through the space and making sure everything was in order for the next day, straightening chairs, checking that books had been returned to their approximate right places, turning off the lights that didn't need to stay on. She found him near the poetry section. He was standing in front of the shelf with his hands behind his back, which was the way he stood when he was looking at something he wasn't sure about. She walked up beside him. She looked at the shelf. The shelf, third shelf down. Neruda is still there, she said, second from the left. He reached out and took it from the shelf. He turned it over in his hands. The spine had no creases yet. This was a different copy than the one she had pointed him towards 7 years ago in a building that belonged to a different chapter of both their lives. I told you once, he said, that I needed something that didn't ask anything of me in return. You didn't tell me that, Emily said. I told you. He looked at her. You told me to try Neruda if I was looking for something that didn't ask anything of me in return, he said. I've thought about that sentence many times over the years. And she said, and I think I was wrong to want that, he said. I think the things worth having ask something of you. The things that don't ask anything of you are the things that don't change you. And I have spent too long not being changed. Emily looked at him. She thought about perennials. She thought about difficult soil. She thought about roots that grow deeper when they have to reach further, and the specific, counterintuitive truth that the hardest ground produces the strongest growth. She took the Neruda book gently from his hands. She put it back on the shelf. Then she turned to face him. Damien, she said. Yes. Ask me something, she said. He looked at her. He understood what she was saying. She could see that he understood. Have dinner with me, he said. Tomorrow. Not foundation business. Not a conversation about programs or funding or 5-year frameworks. Just dinner. Emily looked at him. She thought about all the things that had brought them to this specific moment in this specific library in front of this specific shelf. She thought about everything it had cost and everything it had built. She thought about the fact that the most important things in her life had all begun with someone simply paying enough attention. She had always been good at paying attention. She had paid attention to him for 7 years. She knew what she saw. Yes, she said. He exhaled. Not dramatically. Just the breath of a man whose controlled exterior had briefly let something honest through. 7 o'clock, he said. 7:30, she said. I have a senior reading group Saturday morning, and I will need time to be a person afterward before I can be good company. He almost smiled. 7:30, he said. Emily turned back to her closing routine. She moved through the library, turning off the last lights, checking the last chairs, doing the work she did every evening in the quiet of a building she had made into something worth coming to. She could hear Damien behind her, not following, simply present in the space. The way he had learned to be present in it, without demand, without performance, simply there. At the door she turned. He was still standing near the poetry shelf. Lock up when you leave, she said. Judith gave you a key last month. She gave me the key, he said, and then told me that the key was for the library and not for anything it might represent. Emily looked at him. That sounds exactly like Judith, she said. It was very clear, he said. Good, Emily said. Judith is very wise. She pushed open the door. She stood in the doorway for a moment with the warm summer evening behind her and the library she had built from almost nothing in front of her, and the man she had spent 7 years looking at clearly standing in the soft light of the poetry section. Some things, she thought, take the exact amount of time they take. They cannot be rushed, and they cannot be forced, and they cannot be manufactured by anyone with enough patience and enough strategy and enough deliberate architecture. They simply grow the way things grow in difficult soil, slowly, and then all at once reaching toward whatever light is available, putting down roots that cannot be seen from the surface, but that hold everything up regardless. She had been walked out of a building with a box of 3 things and one word ringing in her ears. She had built something better than what she lost. She had done it by being exactly and completely herself in difficult conditions, without apology, without diminishment, without once allowing anyone else's assessment of her value to become her own. That was not a small thing. That was everything. Good night, Damien, she said. Good night, Emily, he said. She walked out into the summer evening. The city was warm and loud and entirely indifferent to the specific enormity of what had just happened, which was exactly right because the most important things always happen in ordinary spaces in the middle of ordinary evenings, while the world moves past without noticing. Emily Carter walked home through the warm June night, and she was exactly where she was supposed to be, which was moving forward, which was always without exception the only direction that mattered.